Hey, it's Dave and Evelyn from the camera store. We are coming live to you tonight to talk about the highly anticipated Nikon Z8. And tonight we're being joined by Russ as well as Chris from Nikon Canada to answer all your questions.
Now, the best part of live streaming for us is the ability to interact with everybody. And this is a very exciting camera and a big announcement from Nikon. So you can send some questions into the chat, or if you don't want to join the chat, you can certainly just send an email to the lovely Evelyn. It's EVELYN at thecamerastore.com.
Yeah, we'll be checking both of those. And of course, I want to thank Nikon Canada as well as Russ and Chris directly. It's been a busy day for them. And they're here joining the Camera Store TV to talk about the camera. And of course, Russ brought us a camera.
Yep, here it is.
But we want to let you guys know we are going to keep this on the nose to 8 p.m. because there might be a certain Northern Alberta hockey team that's playing tonight against Las Vegas.
Somebody's a fan of the table.
Yeah, it's game 4 of the NHL playoffs. We want to be mindful of that. But most importantly, we want to make sure we get to as many of your questions as possible. So make sure you put them in the chat if you've been having any burning inquiries throughout the day, because we want to try to get to as many as possible.
Absolutely.
So let's jump right into it. Chris, why don't you take it away and share a few details of what you think are some of the most exciting features that people are talking about today.
All right, well, I'll say thank you very much for having me. Unfortunately, I'm not there with you guys in person. I am in Toronto, so I'm here virtually. But as you said, Evelyn, it's been a really busy and exciting day for us. We've finally launched the Z8, and there definitely are some, I'll say, top level features. There's a million that we could go into. And Dave, I know you had asked me to do a 4-hour long presentation today, but I'm going to cut it down to only about 5 or 6 slides. So I'm going to keep it nice and short for everybody.
That's good, because I've heard you talk before.
I'll start off by saying that honestly, one of the biggest features of the camera is how similar it is to the Z9, and some of the things that I'll be talking about over the next couple minutes basically are just how close it really is, but in a smaller and more kind of form-fitting body. So it is definitely kind of great to have all the features of the Z9 in a compact body. That's really, I think, what a lot of people, whether you're a landscape photographer, a wildlife photographer, if you're in the bush for hours on end and you're going to be hiking for extended periods of time, you want something smaller and lighter with you that isn't going to be eating up all your bag space, and you can bring more food and water with you, which is always nice. If you're a wedding photographer, an event shooter, you might be on your feet for 7, 8, 9, 10 hours, 12 hours a day, and having something that loses a little bit of weight is always a great thing. But beyond the actual just weight savings of the camera, I'll say one of the kind of pivotal features of the entire Z8 is the fact that it actually shares the stack sensor from the Z9. It shares obviously a lot of other things, the X-Speed 7 processor, blah, blah, blah. But the kind of the linchpin of the whole camera is really centered around that stacked CMOS sensor. And don't worry, I won't be going into a whole diatribe about how amazing stacked sensors are, but I will just kind of give 4 main benefits that you do get with a electronic sensor versus the mechanical shutter, because we did actually, just like the Z9, remove the mechanical shutter from the camera. So obviously right off the bat, it is absolutely silent, which means you can go and turn on a digital noise if you do choose to, but you can shoot silently the entire time. So no matter what it is you're shooting, you can be silent. You're not going to have people kind of looking over going, hey, who's shooting with that machine gun over there? No. You can be fully silent and not disturb anybody. Another big benefit of the electronic shutter is the fact that you don't have the same wear and tear on a camera. A lot of people go and buy a camera and think about, okay, well, in a couple years I might be selling this. Well, what's the shutter actuations that I've put on it? Well, you don't need to worry about that with the Z8 or the Z9. Minimal rolling shutter. Obviously, we have the fastest scan rate of our sensor that's on the market right now. So you have very minimal rolling shutter, and you are able to achieve incredibly fast shutter speeds with an E shutter only, up to 1/32,000th of a second. The little asterisk to that, though, is if you are wanting to go in sync with a flash, you are capped at 1/8000th of a second. Now, this is kind of tying into that. What does it share with the Z9? And honestly, one of the greatest features of the Z8 is the fact that it does share the same autofocus as the Z9. You're getting our most powerful autofocus. We've had multiple iterations of the Z9's autofocus with multiple firmware upgrades. Well, all of those firmware upgrades come right to the Z8, along with all of the subject tracking and the subject detection modes that we do have. So it still goes and can automatically select up to 9 different subjects, whether it's people, dogs, cats, birds, a whole slew of vehicles. But the one difference actually between this and the Z9 is the Z8 actually has a dedicated airplane subject detection mode. The Z9 has airplane detection mode, but it's built into the vehicles. So you are a big aviation nut and you want to go and only select airplanes, you now have that ability with the Z8. Second last slide, I promise. Not going to go on for the 4 hours that Dave asked me to. Honestly, going back to the size is how much smaller it is than whether it's a D850, maybe it's a camera that you're coming from, whether you're still in the DSLR world and you're thinking about making the transition over to into the Z system, 15% smaller, coming in 910 grams, and it's 30% smaller and lighter than a Z9. So it's almost a pound lighter, going 910 versus 1340. So that is a sizable difference when you're comparing it against, let's say, the Z9, which currently was the best camera that we could offer. Now you're getting that in that smaller and lighter form factor. And the last thing I kind of want to talk about is something that's a little bit more difficult to discuss in a marketing way. When you look at the specs on whether it's the Z9 or the Z8's viewfinder, it is not class leading in terms of the actual numbers on a page. It's 3.6 million dots, and there are high resolution EVFs out there on the market. But one of the things I'll say that when you actually pick up a Z9 or a Z8, the EVF experience is, and I'm biased, so I fully admit that. My biased opinion is that the Z8 and Z9 are going to give you probably the best experience as you're actually shooting, whether it's the natural view that you'll actually get from the EVF or the fact that you're getting a truly blackout free. So you're not getting any repeating frames, you're not getting any kind of, we call it kind of warp frames, and all that is due to the dual stream technology. Basically, we get a feed directly from the sensor to the processor to save the images, but you also get a direct feed from the processor, from the sensor to the EVF as well. So all of that really kind of adds up to an incredible experience, especially if you are shooting sports and action. Other cameras at its price point just cannot go and provide the blackout-free experience that you will go and get with a Z8. And that's pretty much it. I could go on for quite a while, but I think I'll kind of leave it there.
I noticed you're a little bit excited about this camera.
just a little.
Well, that's fantastic. And again, we wanted to mention that Dave and I had the opportunity to finally get a Z8 in our hands, and so we've been testing it out today. We do have a review coming soon, and so make sure you stay tuned to that, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe. But we're going to get into some of these questions. We have these guys here with us tonight, so it'll be for both of our benefits. We can learn together. But I have some few questions in the chat already. I'm going to start with Dwayne Smith's question. Can the Nikon Z9 menu banks be loaded into the Z8?
That is a question I will test as we actually go through. I do have a Z9 and a Z8 here. I have a memory card in this. I'll actually run that through. So as we're going through, I'll jump back in and answer that for Dwayne.
Sounds good.
Great question.
See, Dwayne, we're looking after you.
Of course, there's a question from Ian. How do I convince my wife the Z8 is a great gift for my 50th birthday?
Easy. So easy.
Yeah, what's your advice, Dave?
Just don't tell her. You know?
I do not recommend that.
I had a customer the other week, and he's like, you know, what's your return policy? I said, we have the 14-day return policy. He says, I'm going to not tell my wife till the 15th day.
That's great.
Yeah.
You know, you can just talk about how like you'll document your life's experiences together. It's great
You
for
gotta
still
sell
Zen
it.
video.
Sell it. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so Flintlock made a comment that it's the same camera as the Z9, only smaller. So I'm going to throw this question to you, Chris. If you can explain some of the differences of what actually sets the Z9 apart. So what are some of the, I guess, sacrifices, if you will, to get the price of this camera down to $1,600 less than the Z9?
I think it's partially price, but I also think it's partially size related. A lot of the features that I'll talk about, because obviously getting into a smaller and lighter body, I think we actually did a really good job cramming as much as we did into it. But there are, like you said, some things that we just can't do. So one of them, built-in GPS, the Z9 has that the Z8 does not. Now, that being said, unless you are outside of cellular networks all the time, most of the time that I use my Z9 or now the Z8, I actually use our SnapBridge app. So paired with my iPhone, I can actually transfer that GPS location data directly to every photo that I take right through our SnapBridge. So depending on how you shoot, that may or may not be a big deal. Another thing that the Z9 has that the Z8 does not is an Ethernet port, so direct Ethernet port. So if you are in a studio all the time and you're tethering and you're using that Ethernet cable, then that can be a bit of a difference. But again, there's a way that you can actually get similar functionality out of the Z8. We have two USB-C ports. And one of those, if you actually want, you can buy an adapter that is a USB-C to Ethernet adapter, which, again, it may not have the full security, because if you're used to being able to essentially not yank it out of Z9, you may not have full security like you're used to, but you can get similar functionality. You don't have the PC sync port that's in the front of the camera on the Z9. How many people utilize the PC sync port at all times? Probably not a whole lot at this point. And then honestly, the biggest two differences for the Z9 that will actually make a difference is battery life, because you are getting a much larger battery with the Z9, so your battery life will be considerably higher. And then it really comes down to ergonomics. Some people obviously really prefer the smaller form factor of a Z8, but there are a lot of people out there that do prefer that vertical grip, whether it's because you're shooting portraits all day long and you want that vertical shutter release, or you just like the feel of a bigger, heavier body. There are people out there that do want that bigger body. So if that's them, then they're going to prefer a Z9.
And I was just going to say, even that, there's a bit of a workaround too, because we do have the optional grip for the Z8. So if you don't want to consistently use a grip, but you want to have access to it sometimes, that's another workaround with the Z8 as well. So.
Yeah, and it's nice. It is the EN-EL15C batteries, but it is backwards compatible as well with the A and the B versions. But of course, a lot of the new cameras have power delivery so that you can charge and power your camera through USB-C. Now, this is one advantage. Actually, Russ was talking to all of our staff today, who, by the way, I don't think I've seen our staff so excited about a camera in a long time. A lot of them are like, yeah, it's another camera, you know. But this was a big deal. But yeah, can you talk a little bit about what we were chatting about today?
Yeah, so I mean, it's something that's new with the Z8 versus the Z9 is the fact that it has two USB-C ports. So, you know, Chris mentioned the fact that you can adapt one of them to Ethernet if you want, but really kind of the idea behind it is you have one port that, you know, is dedicated for accessories, right? If you're using a gimbal or you want to use like our MCN10 grip, and then you have the other one that you can use for power delivery, for battery charging. It offers some flexibility that you don't see in a lot of cameras, right? That if you're shooting video, the way that you can rig this camera up is quite unique and honestly just offers some efficiencies that you don't see in other cameras on the market.
That's fantastic. I mean, the Z9 has a big battery, as you tested too, right? Now, you can shoot all day with it, and it's phenomenal. What is the battery life on the Z8?
So that's a bit of a loaded question, as we all know, because I
put you on the spot, Chris.
Yeah, and that was a question from
absolutely.
Terry. So thanks so much, Terry. For a great question.
So the battery life, as per CIPA ratings, we all know it really is not. It's not what you would expect from real world shooting. The CIPA rating was really kind of based around DSLRs, which they leave the camera on a tripod, they shoot once, they leave the camera for 30 seconds, but they leave it on. Now, for a DSLR, that makes no difference whatsoever. But for a mirrorless camera, you have the EVF on, you have the sensor on. So there's a lot going on in the process. So just shooting once every 30 seconds isn't really indicative of what you'll get in the real world. I usually say, depending on how you have your camera set up, usually take the SEPA ratings and multiply that by between 3 and 5. You can really kind of eke it out if you dial down some of the power, or dial up some of the power saving features of the camera. But I would say, so Russ, we actually got the camera into Russ's hands.
I was just thinking about it.
And
yep.
yeah, when we were out there, we were shooting for a good maybe 2.5, 3 hours, and it was in a fast action, birds in flight type of scenario. And Russ, about 3/4 of the way through, said, "Oh, Chris, do you have an extra battery for me?" And I was going, "Oh man, he's going through batteries already. Geez, this isn't looking good for the battery life of the camera." And then I asked him, I said, "Hey, by the way, I'm just curious, how many shots have you actually put on?" And he said, "Oh, only 4,500." So
true story. Yeah, and the battery that you gave me wasn't even fully charged when I got it either.
Yeah, and I'll give a little plug to Russ too that we're gonna share some of his photos in a review of these wicked shots of birds in flight, lots of birds of prey. So if you are a bird photographer, again, stay tuned for the episode of the Z8 where
Awesome.
those will be featured.
Yeah. Now, do you find when you're using the camera, do you turn the camera on and off all the time, as opposed to a DSLR camera, where you leave it on all the time?
I generally do. Even with a DSLR, I actually, just because, and it kind of comes down to the ergonomics, having that power button right here at the flip of a switch, I do turn it off. But when I'm shooting in certain situations, I won't turn it off, but I will have the camera generally set to a quicker turn off time. So it'll usually turn off within about 10 to 20 seconds. I'll even sometimes, to really kind of get out the battery life, I'll turn the EVF into kind of what I call DSLR mode, where the EVF will turn off until I bring it up to my eye and I actually activate it with one of the buttons. So there are ways to get even better battery life, but generally I do turn the camera off.
Okay. We have a great question here, though. It's from a little bit earlier, and sorry I missed it. But Cooley wants to know, how does it compare with F-mount lenses on a Z series camera? This is such a good question because we know that there's a lot of people that might be D850 users or maybe older DSLRs, and they've been waffling about mirrorless, and this truly is the successor to the D850. So can you talk a little bit about adapting F-mount lenses?
It's fantastic.
It's fantastic.
No,
you have a really good adapter. Talk about the adapter.
Yeah, and I mean, you use the, and Chris weigh in too, but yeah, you use the FTZ2. Those birding shots that we referenced, I actually shot all of those with an F-mount lens. I mean, the compatibility is excellent, and you actually wind up benefiting in a lot of cases with, compared to what you're used to with your F-mount lenses, because you start to layer in features like focus peaking and the vibration reduction from the body. So your F-mount glass might actually be better on a Z camera than it is on your DSLR. And for most lenses, you retain full functionality in terms of things like autofocus and all that. You can shoot a Z8 at 20 frames per second with continuous autofocus with an F-mount lens. You don't need a Z lens to do that.
You can even shoot at 120 frames per second with autofocus, with an F-mount lens, and still get superb results out of it.
Absolutely.
And that's the 11 megapixel JPEGs when you go into that mode?
Bingo.
Yeah, which is still pretty impressive.
That's amazing, right? 120 frames a second, your camera's adjusting AF.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, is there any performance loss with the older F-mount lenses, with the older motor technology? Is it able to keep up with the 120 frames per second?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
As long as you have a G or an E-type lens, so G for Greg, G or E-type lens, you lose nothing at all. Because I hate the word adapter. I really, really do. People hear adapter, especially, you may think about losing things. You really don't. This is not an adapter. It's basically just a spacer. So there's no glass in here. It's just electronics. It's just a spacer giving you that proper distance that the F-mount lenses need.
Excellent. Now this is a question. I'm going to throw this one to Russ and see what you can, how you can answer it. But of course, lots of people are really excited about the release of this camera. If you pre-order one now, are you guaranteed to get one by the release date, or will it be back ordered for months? We saw, I mean, the Z9, I think out of the gate was a lot more popular than Nikon expected. So are you able to comment on that?
Yeah, so...
For Canadians,
yeah,
by the way.
absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, Z9, obviously, we were a bit of a victim of our own success in a way, right? We obviously had a lot of demand for it. The Z8, so the sales start date globally is going to be May 25th. In terms of supply, I can't comment exactly. I can tell you that we are quite confident about the number of quantity that we're going to have. It's really going to come down to sort of what that initial demand is, how we have to spread that out. But it's definitely going to be a very different experience than it was with the Z9. We're going to have cameras come quick and in good quantity. So it's going to be exciting. If you're interested in putting your name down, you're not going to wait long to get your number one.
At the camera store.
Absolutely.
At the camera store. We have Gary in the chat tonight. You can always contact him, or just go to thecamerastore.com, put your pre-order in, and we'll take care. And Jeff, of course, too. Well, you were commenting earlier.
All right, let's stir the pot a little bit here.
Ooh, yeah, let's
stir the pot. So we have some cameras on the market now that are incredible autofocus sensations, like the Z8, Z9 are very good focusing cameras, but we also have cameras now like the Sony a7R5, which has AI built into the camera. How does this camera compare as far as AI goes? Is it built in? How does it compare with the other autofocus sort of leaders in the market?
Yeah. We haven't had a chance to test it ourselves.
First off, I will debate slightly your usage of AI. AI means generally that it actually gets smarter as you continue to use it. AI is it's a continuously learning algorithm that gets smarter and smarter. No camera on the market has true AI. The Z9, the Z8, and like you said, the A7R Mark V, they have algorithms that were based on deep learning. So a ton of data was fed into a computer, and then it spat out the algorithms that we now use in our cameras. But true AI, in terms of the fact that what I shoot is going to be different, my camera may turn out different than the way Russ shoots and the way Dave shoots and the way that will not actually happen. So I'll just kind of clarify a little bit, because I'm a little pedantic. Deep learning is the biggest thing in a lot of the cameras. And I will say that, yes, don't get me wrong, the A7R Mark V has some great deep learning algorithms built into it. But the one thing I will say that's really going to help set this camera apart is the stack sensor. So us being able to go and do 120 autofocus calculations per second. Sony doesn't generally go and put their figure out, at least for their A7R Mark V, but it is significantly lower in terms of the number of autofocus calculations. So yes, it can go and track and follow and be sticky, but in terms of actually keeping up with an incredibly fast-moving subject, it could be different. I'm not saying it is going to be night and day, and it's one is going to suck and one's going to be great. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm just saying the stacked sensor capability really can, in certain situations, set them apart, just because of the pure autofocus calculations, the brute force that the Z8 and the Z9 do have.
Yeah, and all I'll say is that this is something that we're looking forward to testing. It seems like every year, maybe even shorter cycles than that, all of the manufacturers are getting better and better with autofocus, where it's really, really tough when it performs so good to really see like which one is doing better, because it seems so incremental at this stage in development. Now we're getting a few questions here actually on the topic of astrophotography, which Russ is awesome with. He does lots of Aurora stuff.
When's your next workshop?
But yeah, so Doug and Alan both had questions related to this. So I'll kind of give you both, and then you can kind of break them down. So Doug was asking, how does the Z8 compare to the Z6 II for astrophotography in terms of ISO and variance? And then Alan was asking about extended long shutter speeds longer than 30 seconds down to 15 minutes, like some of the other Nikon Z cameras for astro work. So yeah, I guess, how does ISO perform? And
we've lost Chris. Now he's going
the
to the
extended long, he's taking a look in the menu.
Yeah. Chris, you can go ahead and take the extended one, because you've got the menu up.
Yep, it's a simple answer. Yes, it does have it. You go and turn on D5 in the custom setting menu, and you now have access when you're in manual shooting to get down to 900 seconds, just like the Z9 does.
Wow.
I would say it, and we'll get to the question of ISO and variance, but I think it's a much better toolbox, right? This is because I do some night photography myself. I'm really excited about some of the things that this camera offers over something like a Z6 II or Z7 II, which are cameras I have been using the last couple of years myself. I like the smallish form factor of this, like those cameras, but it's now giving me things that I don't see in those previous cameras. So things like light up controls, right? The fact that you have the warm display colors, so that you can basically set your display so your menus are showing red or your EVF is showing red, so that you're not impacting your night vision. That you have the starlight view, which Chris has selected in the menu, so it'll brighten the EVF to help you ensure your focus and composition is spot on. So yeah, you can put an image framer on it, so you can see exactly where, in nighttime sometimes it's hard to tell exactly where you're framing your shot because your subject is dark. So the image frame is going to help give you guidance where that is, and even just the fact that the screen articulates differently than it does in a Z6 II or Z7 II. If you're doing a portrait orientation landscape shot, if you're low to the ground, it's a little bit uncomfortable. Sometimes you're down on your hands and knees, or you're laying down to make sure you're lined up and shooting properly. Now it's so easy. You just angle your screen a little bit differently, and away you go. So I think usability in those situations is going to be just so awesome. I'm really excited about those functions myself.
Fantastic. We have a couple comments here from Photography. I hope that I'm saying it right. And shout out to you. We're excited to chat with you soon. But I just wanted to talk about a mode that is kind of cool, and it's skin smoothing for both photography and video. And I'm sensing weddings. I'm sensing event work. Can you talk a little bit about how that works, and does it look good? That's the question.
That's really the ultimate.
Yeah, so it'll work in the sense that you can soften the skin of up to 3 people at one time, which obviously makes you're not just shooting one person at all times. So it does give you a little bit of flexibility if there are some groups, which is very nice. But the bigger thing for me is, yes, it works in stills, and that can be good for some forms of photography, but we know that a lot of people, generally when you're editing photos, especially if it's of a portrait, especially if you are getting paid for it, you're most likely going to be a little bit picky about it, and you're going to want to go and do it afterwards with your whatever third-party software you use. But the cool thing about this is it actually works in video mode as well. So it's not just a stills feature, it's a video feature, which to my knowledge is the first time that it's been released. Obviously for Nikon it is. I think that's the first time in the market as well. So there are varying degrees that you can go and turn it on. You can have low, medium, high, set up. So it is a very cool feature. Not everybody's going to use it, but it is definitely a differentiator, not only on the stills, but the video side.
Well, let's talk video while we're at it, because this is a very impressive camera on the video side of things. So what sets this camera apart from the Z6 II or the Z7 II?
I'll say the biggest difference is what it's capable of right out of camera. So obviously you can go and shoot 8-bit with a Z6 or Z7 and record that internally. If you want to go and shoot 10-bit or any of the RAW options, you have to go and get an external recorder. And if you do want to go and get RAW, it's a paid firmware upgrade. With the Z8 and the Z9, you want 8-bit, you want 10-bit, you want to go HLG, N-Log, you want to go 12-bit and RAW up to 8K 60p, all while recording internally. You have all of those options. So the full flexibility, I think, is key when it comes to both the Z8 and the Z9, is you don't need any of the external recorders to really get the most out of it. You can do it as a smaller compact system. So if you're a kind of a small run and gun crew, and you don't want to be building out your rig as big as you have to with some other cameras, you can do it all right in camera. So that's really, really impressive.
And I would even just throw in, because you kind of sort of indirectly hit on that, is that small form factor of the Z8 compared to the Z9 even, You know, if you're using it on a gimbal or a shoulder rig or something like that, it's a better chassis for, I think, for a lot of video work. And then we talked about it already, but having those 2 USB-C ports, right? It's you know, a lot of the video capabilities are the same as the Z9, but the toolbox around it, maybe for video, can be a little bit better even.
Yeah, and it has a lot of like the pro inputs. Maybe you have a full-size HDMI port.
Big plus.
It makes a big difference, really, just in setting up your rig, feeling secure, having like the tightest connection, and then also just having audio monitoring as well, and being able to work with that. And
Waveforms.
the preamps are the same. Is that correct? To the Z9?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, which have been proven to be solid preamps. It sounds great out of camera. Yeah. Any other video questions?
Well,
Waveforms, waveform monitor, being able to do time code syncing. The red record frame around the frame, which sounds like a minor feature, but it can be really, really nice. We have better sound than in the Z6, Z7, so 24-bit linear PCM sound versus the, I believe, 16-bit that's in the Z6, Z7. So a lot of like small features that add up to a really, really powerful camera.
Now, one thing, I mean, some of these video formats are very sort of processor intensive and certainly data intensive. So we have a CF Express Type B card slot. I was a little surprised that it wasn't a dual CF Express Type B card slot, and you opted to have one of each, an SD card slot as well. What was the design choice for that? What was the reasoning behind that?
I think it's a kind of a dual function. One of it is just size, being able to get the body as small as we could. Really, I think, helped putting in an SD card as a second slot. But to be honest, at this kind of level for the consumer that we're expecting, a lot of people have SD cards from other cameras, and going and having to spend the money on a XQD or CF Express card, as much as we know that you get a lot of benefits out of the CF Express, we also know that they can get pricey. That's not something that we have to kind of discount when we think about people buying these cameras. The camera at 5,400 Canadian dollars is not. We know the value of the camera, but we also know that this is money that people are having to spend out of their hard-earned dollars. So when you add that on top of having to buy a CF Express Type B card, we know that just adds one more expense. And absolutely, I recommend getting one, especially if you're going to be pushing the buffer or doing any high resolution or video intensive RAW features. But having an SD card in there makes the transition much, much easier.
Yeah, you can stagger that purchase out. Or, I mean, even in a pinch, right? All of a sudden, you just need extra memory card space. You've got your suite of SD cards kicking around, right?
Yeah, and it's a lot easier in a pinch if you're traveling to find an SD card than it is to find a CF Express Type B card, for sure.
Well, certainly is a convenience factor of SD cards, no doubt about that.
It's a nice safety net, I think.
But are there certain video formats that you can't use both cards, you can't be redundant with?
So there's certain information about the Z8 that I'm still waiting on, and that's actually one of them. So I don't know exactly where the kind of cutoff is between CF Express Type B and SD. There definitely is some. My guess right off the bat is that anything RAW, whether it's ProRes RAW or NRAW, you will not be able to go and use the SD cards. That's my guess. Even some of the 10-bit, I don't know that that's even going to be able to function with the SD cards, especially if you're not using the fastest SD card, which at that point, if you're going to buy the fastest SD card, just go and buy a CF Express Type B and not have to worry about it. So I don't know for sure. That's one of the things that we will try and get you information on, but we just don't have it on the day of launch.
Yeah, now, not to belabor this, but Flint made a point about it's only important in video. However, I do want to touch a little bit about buffering as well. So obviously, if you have a CF Express Type B card, you're able to get up to 1,000 frames if you use your high efficiency RAW. But if you're using a backup card, you're only going to be able to buffer as fast as that SD card. So same thing, if you're using like a V90 card, I'm assuming you're going to be able to clear the buffer a lot faster. But can you just touch on that a little bit for how it impacts still photographers?
Yeah, so that's honestly the biggest and really, I'll say, only thing that it's really going to impact is the actual buffer. And again, the buffer is the second thing that I do not have full numbers on that I can rattle off because we're still waiting on certain things from the manual as well. But you hit it out of the park there. You basically would take the words out of my head. As a still photographer, if you are shooting large buffer and you want to be shooting RAW plus JPEG, and basically having RAW go to one card, JPEG to the other, you are going to be hampered if you're using a much slower SD card.
Yeah, there's such a spectrum of SD cards out there, right? Like
Yeah, like the
you
little
wanna
card
grab
you buy
the
at
5-year-old
Walmart.
one, or yeah, the one from Walmart that. Yeah.
I mean,
Don't do that, by the
I mean,
way.
I do find like the CF Express cards are very robust. Like they are incredibly fast for one thing, but they seem like they are more robust than the SD cards. Failure rate, I think, is far less on them than SD cards.
Well, and I can tell you from my own personal experience, like the best thing for me with the new format CF Express XQD is also the back-end workflow, right? How fast you can ingest that card into your computer when you're going to do your video editing or your stills. It's so much more convenient. I get so frustrated now when I'm using SD cards because you just feel like you're totally your thumb's waiting for your card to download. So
no, we recognized that a couple of years ago. We were shooting with a different camera, but we had 5 gigs of data on a CF Express card, and with a very expensive card reader, but into a MacBook Pro, 5 gigs took 11 seconds to transfer.
yeah, it's crazy, right?
Like
So,
11 seconds.
Makes
So
a big difference.
the time is worth money.
if you're
Buy a
impatient,
CF Express card.
right? Like once you've done it,
Yeah.
you can't go back.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we have a personal lost connection question here. So again from Vahagrathy, Chris, were you at WPPI 2 years ago in Vegas? You guys might have
I was
chatted.
at
misconnections here.
WPPI this year. I was at WPPI this year, so just a couple months ago. So if you weren't there this year, then it definitely wasn't me. It was somebody else. It was my doppelganger.
How could there be someone else like you? I don't know. Okay, so let's get into the animals. So you touched on this briefly in your slide, but I just wanted to go a little bit deeper into which animals can it track and detect the eyes of? For autofocus.
So that's a very nebulous question.
I know.
In terms of, yeah, you knew you were putting me on the spot just like David.
That's why I let you take it, Chris.
Yeah, I saw Russ just do this.
Yeah.
The official answer is dogs, cats, birds.
Yeah.
That's what we train it on. But any animal that has very similar features to a dog or a cat, it is going to pick up with no problem. I've shot elk. Russ and I were actually just shooting goats. Goats. What were they, Russ?
They were bighorn sheep.
Bighorn sheep, sorry, goats.
Oh, those are the exotic goats.
Yeah, the exotic goats.
The exotic goats of Canmore. Sorry.
Bighorn sheep, sorry. There are a lot of animals that have very similar facial structures, and that is definitely going to get picked up with very little issue whatsoever by the Z8 or the Z9. So it's a difficult thing to really nail down. The ones that we say for sure, dogs, cats, birds, but there are a lot of other animals that are picked up. I've even heard some of our ambassadors going over to Africa shooting elephants. They look absolutely nothing like any of the things that we have trained it on, and it still picks it up with no problem.
Yeah, and here's an interesting thing. I mean, you have auto subject detection, so it'll look to see if it's a bird, if it's an animal, if it's a dog or a cat or a plane, and auto suggest. What's the hierarchy of how it's going to decide? Is it people first? Is it the closest subject first? How does it decide in auto detect what subject it's going to go for?
That's a good question, and
You're welcome.
you just made me give like a 45-minute long dissertation on our autofocus. It depends on, I'll say very kind of quickly, it depends on the autofocus mode being used. If let's say you're using 3D autofocus where you have the single point, you go and place it around the thing that you want, whether it's the person back here, whether it's me, and at that point it's really just going to look at what's around the box. So it's going to look at the box and it's going to say, okay, that's a person, that's a dog, that's a bird, that's a plane, and it's going to jump to whatever is around the box, and it'll automatically be able to detect it. Whether there's a hierarchy, if you're using, let's say, auto, I believe the majority of the time it's going to go for closest thing to the camera. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the times if you have, let's say, a dog in the background and you have people in the foreground, it'll probably jump to the people in the foreground. But that's, again, one of those reasons why we generally recommend to be, depending on what type of photography you're shooting, 3D is really kind of a do-all type of mode, because you have the ability to be really specific in terms of what you want it to initially lock onto. And then once it's locked on, that person or dog or plane or whatever can move anywhere throughout the frame, and the camera's not going to get confused and jump to something else because it's already locked onto that initial subject.
Yeah, and actually from our short amount of testing we did today, we were able to photograph a puppy today, and it was a lot of fun. And I did notice that when we were in the auto subject detection, the dog was closer to me, and it was picking up the dog's eye, and so we were doing like shallow depth of field, so puppy's face was in focus. That's the most important thing. Person was not as in focus. Yeah, did you want to, you said there was a good question here.
Yeah, so we have USB-C. We have 2 ports now. Where's the question here? Is it going to be possible via firmware to use external memory through the USB-C?
Right, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Can you repeat the question? I was reading one of them.
With the USB-C
online.
ports, are you going to be able to plug in like an SSD drive and record directly through the USB-C?
As of right now, no. That is not something that we unfortunately offer. I have heard it asked quite a bit, and it's one of the things that I've written down as recommendations for the future. But as of right now, it's not something we offer.
Cool. So there's no shutter, but is there a shutter life for the Z8? Is there like a maximum number of actuations?
Nope.
There's no shutter.
Easy answer.
There's no shutter. Don't you love questions like that?
So do these cameras have like a life expectancy? Is there something where you're like, hey, these are good for a certain amount of hours of use rather than a shutter count?
Not really. No, there's no real kind of benchmark or anything that we can kind of point to and say you've used it this amount of time. It's kind of up there in the ether now, whereas before we had that shutter actuations as kind of what you would look at. Now it's really just other pieces. It's how you kind of treat the camera, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Another question back to the autofocus. Can you talk a little bit about when it is able to pick up an eye, how far away it's able to pick up the eye?
I can say confidently that it will pick up an eye probably at the furthest point than any other brand out there. So the Z8 and the Z9 are able to go and pick up an eye at the furthest distance. I will also kind of say that the distance that it picks it up, it's almost so small that it doesn't really matter at that point. So like depth of field wise, you've reached the point where if it picks an eye versus a head versus a full body, the depth of field, even if you're shooting with an 85 1.2, is still going to give you enough room that your entire subject is going to be covered. So it's quite a distance away.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Is there any, when it comes to the grip of the Z8, is there any thoughts about putting the same battery that's in the Z9 into it?
Won't fit, so let's stop thinking about it.
No, they did it before.
Yeah. I don't know. I have a feeling it was size related, that if you go and try and fit the larger battery in there, it will make the grip even larger. So I have a feeling that there were some size issues that went along with that decision, but I don't know for sure.
And did we figure out for my friend Dwayne? Did we figure out if you're able to transfer the menu?
Yes, I did. Unfortunately, it does not. I didn't think it would. There are enough settings differences between menu differences between the two cameras that it wouldn't know what to do, and it would get confused if you're pulling menu 1, 2, 3 that is not in the Z9. So if there's any differences between cameras, generally they're not going to transfer, and in this case, that follows suit.
Chris, just going back to the grip, do you have a grip there on your end?
I do. I don't think I have it right here. I can probably grab it.
Well, we can just talk. We can just
here.
talk about it. That's fine. I just didn't want to ignore it completely because there is a grip for the Z8 for people who do want to use it.
So you brought up a good point earlier today when we were talking how it does take 2 of the ENL15C batteries, but on the video side of things, you can hot swap.
You can hot swap them, which is why I wanted to make sure. You know, I was a bit smart about it didn't fit, but there's actually some benefits to the fact that we went with the 2 ENL15s because you can basically have continuous power? I didn't want to be dismissive on that question.
We have an in-house question from Gary. And I think you touched on this before with the fastest flash sync speed for flash photography.
1/200th of a second. I believe you can get it up to one. I'm checking as we answer. Yeah, you can get up to 1/250th at the high setting, but 1/200th is the kind of normal option in the camera, just like the Z9.
Okay. Someone said they saw in Jared Poland's video that it shows the Z8 IAF worse than the A7R5. Should we expect Nikon will improve with future firmware? Can you talk a little bit about how some of the changes that we've seen with firmware just in general? And I mean, you probably can't speak to how someone else did their test, but just how firmware can affect things.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen with the Z9 that firmware can be and is continuously being updated with these cameras, and it can make huge differences. We can add brand new features. We actually even teased that with the Z8 there are going to be a couple firmware updates that we've even said. One for video being that the N-Log, the ISO ceiling is or I guess floor is usually 800 when you shoot in log. Well, we're actually going to be bringing that down with the Z8. So definitely we can majorly improve cameras and add features in. Will we continue to do it? We absolutely will. But yeah, it's very difficult to speak to the tests that other people go and do with the cameras, and even depending on. And this is kind of goes to some of the testing, if you're not looking at the end resulting images, don't get me wrong, the Sonys go and look like they stick very well. But if you're not comparing the final resulting images, that can sometimes also influence as well. If you're just looking at how it looks on the screen, that might give you great confidence. But when you have to look at the other side and look at the final images as well. So I haven't seen his video. I don't know what he did and how he did it. So it's one of those things that I'll say no comment.
Sounds
I mean,
good.
really, we're at a level now where the autofocus of these cameras is insane. Like,
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier.
I've been super confident with this so far, for sure, and I felt the same way with the Z9.
Yeah. So we have a few more questions. We're going to get to some more, but if you have a few more, you can pop them in. We'll try to get to as many as we can, but we are going to wrap up pretty soon.
Are the Oilers started? Is your watch going on?
Don't worry, I want to help people out here.
Yes, of course. So how does the Z8 perform in hot temperatures? Read some reviewers saying that the CF Express card overheated, saying this is because I'm from Malaysia. Welcome from Malaysia. So it's always sunny. We're jealous. Like, today we were talking about it's nice and cool, so we didn't have any overheating issues at all. But can you talk about heat?
Yeah, I haven't heard of any overheating issues from any of the launch photographers, launch videographers that we've had, and between us and the U.S., there was a lot of talented people who were getting their hands on this camera and really putting it through its paces. And through my experience, I've had cards overheat on me in a Z9, but that is absolutely not the camera overheating. That's the card overheating. So those, and the way that question was phrased, it actually sounds to me like it's the card overheating.
Yeah,
and
I think that's what they're saying.
Specific CF Express Type B cards, depending on what brand, depending on what model you're looking at, they can get very hot. And that's not actually a camera thing. That is a card issue. So I know that certain brands will overheat much faster than others. So I would say the way he's phrasing that may have actually been a card thing, not a camera.
This is kind of a curious one. Vahography says, any performance differences using the ENL 15 batteries on a Z8 compared to using with longer telephoto lenses compared to using the Z9? So is there a different voltage in the batteries? Is there a different performance issue as far as driving the lens?
Is there a difference in what the batteries are able to put out? And the answer is yes. Just larger batteries, so you're able to hold more. I do believe the voltage might be a little different. I'd have to grab the two. But in terms of end resulting performance, nope. Very simply, the ENEO 15C battery is an internally regulated battery that we make sure is going to work with every body that we have that takes it, but that is also going to function 100% with any lens that we put on it as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've talked a lot about this camera being like an awesome speed camera. It has the stacked sensor. One of the things that I feel like doesn't get mentioned as much is that it has a base ISO of 64, which is exciting for landscape photographers and being able to shoot in brighter conditions. And that paired, again, for brighter conditions, having the higher shutter speed makes it so that you can shoot in a variety of conditions without having to bring ND filters around. Can you talk a little bit about, in your experience when you've been shooting, what you've been able to achieve with those settings?
Yeah, having lenses like the 51.2, the 85 1.2, it really allows you, especially on bright sunny days, to really knock down your ISO to its absolute base, knowing that you're still getting great dynamic range. Because generally, because you can't obviously go into any of the low settings, the low one, getting you down to like an ISO equivalent of 32. But anytime you do that, I was wary going into the extended high or the extended low ISO range. You're not looking at the optimum quality. So I have done tests, as you guys know, I'm slightly picky when it comes to things like that. So you can actually see a dynamic range difference when you get into that low setting. So being able to stick to the 64, not have to go and put filters on your lens to kind of cut down the amount of light. It definitely does help, especially with like an 85 1.2 on a bright sunny day. Oh, it's an absolute godsend.
Yeah, so then all of a sudden you have like a phenomenal landscape tool too,
absolutely.
For dynamic range.
Speaking my language.
I mean, this is what we're talking about with this camera, is that it's that high-end jack of all trades camera. Like, it's really, like we talked about, there's nothing you can't go out and shoot effectively with it. If it's high resolution for landscape, if it's fast action and sports, you've got crazy frame rates available with this camera. So it's that one camera that sort of rules the world.
You need to switch and do video.
That's what we're going
You've
for?
got a great video toolbox. Yeah, it is. It really kind of does it all.
And then my husband, Jordan Drake, is in the house, new to Petapixel.
This is my favorite question so far.
Hi, Jordan.
Hi, Jordan. He's wondering if there's going to be a Z8 Noct bundle. Maybe just for him.
It's too heavy.
Oh my
It's
God.
more than a knock.
Tell Jordan to call me, and I'll get him a Noct bundle.
Oh, hear that, Jordan? I don't know. You might have to do some convincing on that one.
Wait,
we're gonna buy the Noct bundle. Yeah. So I think what we want to do here is just, end and wrap up this thing with telling you guys that we're really excited about this camera. And I mentioned it earlier that the staff at the camera store have been super excited. Everyone that we've talked to, it's nice to see a lot of buzz going on.
It is. It's super fun.
And it's interesting because, it's saying that, okay, we have this camera that's, the flagship mirrorless camera, and now we have something that's $1,600 less Canadian, 30% smaller and lighter. And it all around, you guys have checked a lot of boxes.
Yeah.
You didn't
what I'm finding,
skip.
since the Z9 was announced, working on the sales floor, right off the bat, the first question is like, oh, I wish it didn't have the grip. I wish it was smaller. I wish I had certain features. And this finally has it, right? It has, I think it appeals more to the masses more than the sort of...
I'm personally so pumped just for my own photography. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to sneak one more question in here. And I think this is an important one because we were chatting a lot about the electronic viewfinder.
Which is beautiful. It is a gorgeous viewfinder.
If you look on paper, the resolution of it is not that exciting. There's a lot of other cameras that have a high resolution. So can you just reiterate, I know you touched on it before, of why this particular electronic viewfinder is so good? When you look through it, it's awesome. Why is that?
Magic. We've little Nikon elves that are able to perform magic like that sometimes. No, honestly, it's a combination of the optics that are in the EVF, and people are going, well, optics, it's a tiny little TV screen, and yes, it is obviously a very small little monitor, but there are a lot of optics. We have a spherical lens elements. You usually only hear about a spherical lens elements when you talk about lenses. Well, we've really spent a lot of time to make sure that our EVFs across the board are very, very good, but especially when it comes to the Z8 and the Z9, you take the optics of the EVF. Even though the resolution may not be the absolute highest on the market, you get a very, very natural looking experience when you shoot through it. I know a lot of people who, before they've even ever looked through, let's say a Z9, they're one of those diehard, no, I'm an optical viewfinder only. I need to have that. And then they put it up to their eye and they just go, oh my God, this looks the most similar to an optical viewfinder that they've ever seen. And then you combine that with our dual stream technology. The dual stream really does give a direct feed from that sensor to the EVF. So when you're shooting, it doesn't matter if you're shooting portraits, landscapes, or very, very fast action, you're going to have no blackout whatsoever. And being able to not have to anticipate where your subject is going to be, but to just be able to see it as you're shooting, even if it's 20 frames per second, is a really, really liberating thing. And that for me is going to be the biggest difference when you compare that versus the conventional censored cameras that are on the market. They do not have that blackout-free experience. And having that experience as kind of difficult as it is to describe to somebody, that probably is going to be my number one feature about the Z8 that I personally love, is when you're shooting fast action in sports, you have no blackout whatsoever. And it really does make a huge, huge difference. So anybody, Z5, Z6, Z7, or even competing brand, if you are curious, the Z8, that is one of the things that on paper, it's not necessarily going to jump out of the page at you, but when you get it up to your eye and you are shooting, it's one of those oh my God moments.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, seeing is believing, right? You know, I mean, it's basically the same EVF as what was in the Z9, but there's a lot of people who probably never looked at it because Z9 was hard to get, or people ruled it out because it's bigger, heavier, more expensive, it wasn't the right camera, so they're not picking it up and looking at it. Because the Z8 is so accessible in so many ways, I really think, like, you can't just look at the specs online or have us describe it to you and tell how good it is. You actually need to come to a store, get it in your hands, come to the camera store, get it in your hands, and look through it, because it truly is a great experience. But it's one of those things, you got to see it with your own eyes.
Yeah, and also another thing that should be mentioned, and I'll give credit to Jordan because he brought it up, but it's important, is that a lot of the time when you're doing like processor intensive stuff and you're shooting fast, you're doing all of that, a lot of the EVF resolutions will actually drop when you're doing that. But the Nikon Z9 and the Z8, it doesn't drop when you're doing that kind of stuff. So then that adds to the experience. So it's big, it's bright, it has a good refresh speed. You have a couple of options if you want to go like more economy with it. But I think your shooting experience is really, at the end of the day, what's going to make you love your camera and want to take it out versus like leave it in its bag.
I honestly almost forget it's an EVF sometimes, except for, you know, the wonderful things that EVS do for you, like focus peaking and things like that.
Yeah, so I think the guys nailed it on the head that if you haven't put the Z9 in your hands and you want to check it out, we have a demo at the camera store. You can come check it out. Or if you are local somewhere else, make sure you go to your local camera store and get those cameras in your hands and get a feel for it. And soon we'll have a Z8 that we'll be able to demo too.
You give each one of us, right? That's part of the deal with tonight.
We'll talk after the video.
Gold-plated. It'll be great. Well, thanks so much, Chris, for taking this time. I know you're out east, so it's a lot later for you.
It's way past your bedtime. We know you worked hard today.
Yes, and thank you, Russ, for joining us here in Calgary at the camera store. And I also want to give a big thanks to Gary and Jeff tonight. They're a TCSTV Live Dream team, and they've been working behind the scenes to make this all go very smoothly. We always have such a nice setup. And then to all of you for watching. We love interacting. We have some really great questions. And don't forget, we're going to have our full review soon, right, Dave?
Full review. We're doing our first look, and then we have the full review coming out soon.
Yeah, lots of good content. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell as well. And we'll catch you guys very soon.
Thanks for joining.